So I want to start by just indulging a little personal fantasy of mine. Imagine getting in the TARDIS with the Doctor and going back to the 1970s or the 1950s or whenever you grew up, and probably doesn't apply to anyone under 30, but it doesn't look like there are too many of you in the audience. So, and imagine telling people that in 2013, where you come from, that parents who want to let their children play out on the street after school would be seen as radicals. I think they might have found that quite bizarre. And then, if you told them that in order to do this, adults would be standing at either end of the street in between two wheelie bins wearing high visibility vests, they would probably wonder what a wheelie bin was. But they would also know that you were definitely bonkers and from another planet, probably. So when I grew up in the 70s, not that long ago, it was just normal for kids to be out and about on the street, on their own, in groups, cycling up and down the street, going to pester older neighbours, knock out ginger. Anyone know that? Knock on the door and run away. It's really fun. Or in my case, quite often just walking to the sweet shop to buy a sherbet fountain or a few blackjacks. That was just what we did. It wasn't to get exercise, it wasn't to build community cohesion, it wasn't to develop our imaginations, it was just more fun than being stuck inside, and because our mums generally wanted us out from under their feet. So when I emerged from my early 20s and became a parent myself, I was quite shocked to find that things had changed quite a lot. And where I live now, this is my neighbourhood, it's just not normal to see children out and about on their own anymore. They tend to be escorted everywhere. They spend most of their time either in school, I'm talking primary school children really, in school or in organised after-school activities or at play dates, or they're stuck inside at home on screens, or if they're lucky, maybe playing in their own back garden. So this isn't just my experience. It's, there's studies have shown that this, what's called children's independent mobility, so that's basically just their capacity to get around their neighbourhood on their own, has massively reduced. And this slide is from, it's showing 4 generations of the same family in Sheffield. So how far an 8-year-old could roam, starting with the great-grandfather who was allowed to travel 6 miles, down to the great-grandson today who at 8 can only go to the end of his street and back. And many other studies kind of back this up as well. So what, you might say? The world's changed, stop being so nostalgic, get over it. Children's lives have always changed. Was it really so great spending hours kicking a can around on the street? We live in a modern age, in the information age, just deal with it. But there are actually a few problems with this. And a major one is, well, although the world has changed, children's needs, their sort of physical, emotional, developmental needs haven't really changed. But they're not being met. And in particular, they're getting fat now, and this was front page news yesterday, I don't know if anyone saw, but and a large part of this is they're just not getting enough physical activity. So current government guidelines are that all children need at least an hour and up to 3 hours of physical activity every day, and these are the numbers that are actually getting this. It's pretty alarming. But as well as this, other really important things for their well-being are not kind of in place. So they no longer sort of have that sense of connection with their local environment that we used to have, that sort of knowledge of their patch. They're missing out on just normal interactions with neighbours of all different ages, all different backgrounds. They tend to be stuck in quite a narrow demographic of who they meet and who they play with. And they're just not getting the same opportunities to learn skills for independence and resilience because they're constantly supervised. So all this is quite worrying to me. So why is this? Why why didn't we just send them out to play? You know, what's the problem? Well, for me and for a lot of other parents, I think the major problem is traffic. It is more complicated than that. There are lots of other factors at play, but there's a kind of vicious circle going on where increased car ownership means streets start feeling more car-dominated. People retreat from that space, and streets become less lived in, less animated. Car drivers have even more license to kind of see it as their space and not worry about anybody else. So the streets become even more dangerous. Parents are less likely to let their kids play out, and so on. So I was talking to some other parents a few years ago about these issues, and I had a particular meeting of minds with my neighbour Amy, who is an artist and a street performer. And we both thought maybe we could use our own street as a sort of test bed for the kind of change that we wanted to see for our children. And we had organised an annual street party for a few years. So we knew that it was possible to apply to the council to close the road and reclaim that space. But a street party, you know, is great fun, but it's quite a lot of organisation, and it involved bouncy castle and food and music, booze. You know, it was great. But what we wanted really was just something simpler and more everyday, more normal. We just wanted to find a way for the children to be able to play out safely in the street. So the model we came up with, or the idea we came up with initially, was just to close the street to cars, to through traffic, for a few hours after school. And this is Amy here, we tried it out on International Children's Day 2009, just as a one-off kind of awareness-raising event, or just as a trial. And we literally just closed the road. We didn't organise anything else. We really held back because we wanted to see what would happen, and we wanted to see how the children would respond, just given that space. You know, would these screen addicts know how to play, or know how to just play out on the street? Well, amazingly, they did. So, you know, we were really reassured. They still had that capacity. And they found all sorts of ways of playing. And in fact, the local play manager in our local council saw a film about the project. And he said, so can you tell me, how did you manage to get the children to engage in so many different play types? And we were like, what's a play type? And, you know, and we said, well, we didn't do anything. We just gave them the space, and they just got on with it. And he was like, oh, well, you've cracked a problem that the professional play world have been battling with for years. And we were like, really? So anyway, we had only intended it as a kind of one-off, but we were encouraged by that sort of reaction, and also by people saying, well, we'd like to do it on our street. So we decided to do a kind of pilot, and we helped 6 streets in our local neighbourhood to do the same thing. And we were also really curious to see how it would work on different types of street, and just to learn more about what worked and what didn't. And we worked very closely with usually 1 or 2 main organisers on each street, but tried to let them do it as much as possible themselves. And we learned a lot, and we learned a lot about what worked better and what didn't work so well. And we also found that on all these streets, the same thing, that basically you make the space available and children will come out and fill it and find really creative and imaginative ways of responding to that space. So again, after that pilot, we still weren't really seeing it as a long-term project, but we created a website. We had a tiny bit of funding. We got a local friend who was a filmmaker to make a film, and we just put it out there, kind of let the idea go into the ether with no real expectation about what would happen. And we also, we made materials that people could use to sort of take the idea and do it themselves on their street. And we broke down the process into kind of these 4 simple steps. So, I mean, the process is basically talk to your neighbours, find out whether people are interested. If people have any concerns, you know, try and talk those through. Then if there's enough support, apply to the local council and that kind of depends where you are, but in Bristol it was quite straightforward because they had a street party procedure. It didn't cost anything. And then thirdly, tell everybody, so publicise it, let people know that it's happening. And then lastly, play out. And the play out bit sounds really simple, but that's where we've got quite a sort of formal procedure about it. So once you've got the permission to close the road, you do generally need to have these adults in high-vis vests, crazy though it sounds, because, and this is what makes this work really, is that residents can still drive their cars in and out because these people are there to escort them in and out safely. So it's a kind of way of making the space safe, but without pissing off car drivers too much. So, and I think that's one of the things that makes it sustainable. So, going back to the story, we didn't really have any expectations, but we found it has kind of started to take off, and this is our headquarters now in Bristol in an empty shop. But just want to go back to the model and just say, you know, it's not a fixed entity. We didn't kind of sit in a darkened room hatching an evil master plan to take over the world. We actually sit in a nice, bright shop space hatching our evil plans. But no, it's not like a fixed thing. We're still learning about what works in different streets, and there are different ideas coming out, and people are sharing those. So it's great. It's just about regenerating a culture of street play. So then the other thing that happened after the website was Bristol City Council thought, oh, we want a piece of this. This is a great idea. So they responded by putting in this temporary play street policy, allowing people to close their road in this way up to once a week. It was a big change, and it was the first place in the country to do that. And other councils are now doing the same. Maybe Bedford will be next. And then at a grassroots level, the idea just started to spread kind of locally. So this is my neighbourhood, my patch in Bristol. And then this highly sophisticated interactive map shows how it's kind of started to spread across the country as well. And one thing that's been very reassuring is finding, you know, we're not the only parents that aren't paranoid about our children playing out. A lot of parents kind of want that freedom for their kids. So, you know, going back to the high-vis vests, it might not sound very radical to be standing around, you know, wearing high-vis and stopping traffic. But we have found that it's a simple idea, but it's quite powerful. And I think it's because it works kind of on 3 levels. So firstly, it meets an immediate need. It helps, you know, lets children play out for 2 hours, gives them that physical activity. It gives them an opportunity to just play freely with other kids on the street. But secondly, it starts actually building conditions over the longer term for street play to be normal. So by doing this, it kind of raises awareness, particularly of car drivers, that that space is a shared space, people live there. And it builds parents' confidence about letting their kids play out more, partly because neighbours get to know each other and the street starts feeling friendlier and safer. And then lastly, it kind of acts on a symbolic level. So it reimagines the street space as play space, and it kind of makes children visible, which they often aren't in cities, and it places them kind of at the heart of their community and gives them the message that they belong there, that that space is theirs too. So I don't want to sound alarmist, but I think if we want to save this idea of street play, we kind of need to act now, because the next generation of parents, those who are now in their early 20s or so, won't remember it as a normal part of their own childhood. So that's why we're trying to build a movement around this now. And all of you are invited to join us. And you can start by just opening your front door. But if you do, watch out for these guys. Thank you.